Hello, and welcome to the Dissidents Podcast, where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society.
So, welcome to this episode of the Dissidents Podcast with my co-host, Winkfield Twyman Jr. We are honored to have today our friend Ian Rowe join us. And Ian, the reason that we love speaking with you in general, but you wrote a piece called Three Cheers for Colorblindness
Yes.
that touched on the book that Wink and I wrote, Letters in Black and White.
Yes.
Hip, hip, hooray.
Yeah.
Hip, hip, hooray. Yes.
Thank you. And there's so much that when we read your article that we want to talk about, and also talk about you and agency, because I feel that we're on a similar level when we talk about agency and what our book is talking about and what your book is talking about agency. But where we want to start is, so Wink and I, when we started writing together, Letters in Black and White, we realized quickly we were kind of getting into this back and forth on race. And then we had to stop ourselves and say, well, what is your origin story? Who am I even writing to?
Right. Once you identified that there were more dimensions
Well,
than
that's right.
skin color, right?
Yes.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. Imagine that we was more than just a black man and a white woman writing letters, that we actually had a story. So our first question to you is, what is your origin story?
Oh, what is my origin story? Okay. My origin story begins, like with all of us, with my parents. And my parents' romance when they were very young in Jamaica, West Indies, because that's where my family's from. And, my parents ultimately were married for 48 years before my dad passed away. But they started dating in the country in Jamaica, in St. Anne's Bay, for your listeners who know that area of Jamaica. And it all sounds very romantic. My father used to pick my mom up on horseback for their dates, right? My wife now is like, "Are you picking me up on horseback?" I'm like,
Where's the horse?
Exactly. If I had a horse, if I could ride a horse.
Right.
But no, they had a beautiful courtship. But at the time, Jamaica was an English Commonwealth. And my dad felt that he had reached kind of the apex of the education he could achieve in Jamaica. So he went to England for school. And he missed my mom, and they had been dating, and he went, by himself. But at the time in Britain, if you wanted to marry someone who's younger than 21, you had to have written permission. You have to write for permission from the parents. So my dad, missing his buds, there was the nickname that they called her, called each other. He wrote the letter of a lifetime, asking for her hand in marriage. And there was lots of consternation in the Sibright household in Jamaica, and because she was young, she was 19, and it was her first boyfriend, but they ultimately said yes. And so my mom took a boat all by herself, 5,000 miles from Jamaica all the way to London, to England, and they got married. And by the way, we'll have to come back to this story, because that moment where my mom's parents said yes to this very weighty decision, I think reemerged at a big moment in my life when I was asking my parents for something. But yeah, so my parents got married in England. They went to school, hard scrabble life, but they said it was amazing. They had my brother, and then 7 years later, they had me. And then ultimately we came to the United States. My dad was one of the first Black engineers at IBM. My mom worked at Manufacturers Hanover, which some of your listeners may remember as Manny Hanny,
Yeah,
which
yes.
through many iterations is now JP Morgan Chase. And my parents valued family, they valued faith, they valued education. And so growing up in New York, when we first moved to Brooklyn and then ultimately to Queens, I could have been living anywhere. It was sort of, I grew up, went to school, woke up in the morning, had breakfast, went to school, came home, did my homework, went to bed, woke up, had breakfast, went to school, came home.
Right, right.
It was a very contained experience. But my parents basically said, "Look, we're coming to this country." Um, they came in 1968, right? So a particularly tumultuous year in the United States, particularly
Yes.
on issues of race. But my parents felt that the country was changing. The Civil Rights Act had passed, and they sensed that there was opportunity. And so they weren't running away from Jamaica or away from England. They were running to the United States. They were running to what they thought was great opportunity for their children. And there's no question that that foundation, per se, my origin story, everything I've been able to do is a function of the foundation that my parents built for me and my brother.
What was your mother's name again, and your father's name?
My mom's name was Eula, Eula, and my
Mhm.
dad's name was Vincent. Vincent Augustus Rowe.
Oh, I love that name. That sounds very formal, like my name.
Yeah.
Uh, and my grandmother was named Eula, so we share that in common.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting. Got it.
Eula
Yes.
Dotson Womack. Yes, that's right. That's right.
These names are just beautiful. And my dad, my parents, so my full name is Ian Vincent Rowe. So my middle name
Yes.
is um, after my dad. And our son Oscar, it's Oscar Rowe, but we named him Oscar Vincent Emilio
Oh, I love
Rowe
it.
because Emilio is my wife's father's name. So
Four
over
names.
is Oscar
I
Vincent
love
Emilio.
it.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. Pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. And
Wink,
of
I
course,
want to
my
let you.
full name is Winkfield Franklin Twyman Jr., and my son is Winkfield Franklin Twyman III, and my father is Winkfield Franklin Twyman Sr., and he was named after his uncle Winkfield Twyman. So the name goes back to like 1890 or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
It is
Tradition.
And Wink, you mentioned something that I think it would be a good, reminder for those who might have read our book is you mentioned how your your names are not Scrabble pieces.
No, they're not.
Do you
Not at
want
all.
to
Not at all.
elaborate on that?
Not at all. My family, particularly my grandmother, strongly believed in the power of names because names, in a sense, kind of set your course in life. Names also honored your ancestors, and that was very important in our family in Central Virginia. And so, in a way, the more numbers after your name, the more prestigious you were received by people. So my son, the third, certainly has the red carpet. And then if you were the fourth, my lord. And if you were the fifth, like John V. McWhorter the fifth, you
Oh,
were
yes.
just could do no wrong. So I came from that kind of environment, Ian, where names were given great weight and purpose. And I think in some ways that was a very good thing because you knew that you didn't just, as the old adage goes, fall out of a coconut tree, quote unquote,
Right.
but you actually were connected to your past, your
Oh,
ancestors by name,
and
if not
right.
by
And
blood.
with some obligation to represent
Of
Yeah.
that
course, yes,
through the ages.
you bet, you bet. Because everyone knew everyone, Ian, as you know from having read my book, Letters in Black and White, as I will do the obligatory show.
There it is. Beautiful. Excellent. Excellent.
Yes, but
And did
I
your
grew up.
did you
Yes,
did your lineage reduce it to Wink or Winkfield? Because
well,
it
that's a
is
great question. That's a great question. So at home, I was always called Winkfield Jr. So the first
oh,
name and Junior, which would distinguish you from your dad, Senior, and your
right,
son, the third.
right.
Uh, but when I was in junior high school, my best friend thought my name was stuffy, just a little bit too prim and proper. So he started to call me Wink, and that took hold. And so I've been Wink since like the eighth grade in junior high school. I
That's
like
funny.
it, sketchy.
My cousin, he'll hate that I say this, but his full name is Tyrone Nevada Howe. and
Ah,
a brilliant kid. But when he was growing
sure.
up, Tyrone was just too, I don't know, too,
Right,
I don't
right,
know,
right.
too much. So now he goes by Nevada, which is a much,
Ah, got you.
which,
Understood, understood.
no, no, naming is important. Naming is
It
important.
is.
It's
It
important.
is.
I think it touches on what you were saying about family, right? And I think what I've seen with Wink in talking about names as well. I mean, it was that family connection that was so important to him, the naming. So that's where I think he came, by saying names aren't just Scrabble pieces. You just don't pull it out of the air, make something up. I mean, it ties you to a certain
Right.
legacy, if you will.
Well, and
Yeah,
also we'll get into it, but I mean, your family, Wink, you have connections to well, I was about to say the founding fathers, to one of,
that
to
that's
a
true.
founding. Yes, I actually want to hear more about that too, because that's quite a discovery. And it's just an interesting thing of what's the implication of that? Like how does that govern your behavior in the same way that you're connected through your first name, Winkfield, to that legacy and what it means? How does being connected to George Washington uh, shape your attitudes and behavior today? We can get into that, but I'm curious.
Okay, okay.
Go for
Um,
it.
Go for it. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, I think it gives me a greater appreciation of being an American. Because if you think about it, if you grew up in a small town in the South, the odds are very good that if your family was here before 1900, you're related to some founding father. It could be Thomas Jefferson. I have third cousins related to Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And by the way, those cousins are also related to Coleman Hughes through the Monticello Hemings family, which is
Oh,
kind of interesting.
right.
So, but my point is, if you happen to be, to use the term, an old American, someone who's been around in the country for centuries, it's not really that noteworthy that you would have a biological tie to a founding father. I think it's just sort of part of the backdrop, it's part of the given. But for me, I definitely felt some sense of affinity and more connectedness to the country of my birth. And it's a generational thing, Ian, because you probably know my views are a minority to you in my family. Well, I have a family member. Interesting story. When I found out I was related to the founding father of our country, the one and the only, George Washington, I was like, yeah, that's kind of neat. So I was in Charlottesville, Virginia before the recent troubles in 2019. And I saw this wonderful color portrait of George Washington. He was in prayer at Valley Forge. And I thought, wow, that really looks nice. It inspires me. I feel more like a Virginian, an American. I'm going to bring it home. And
Oh, this
so
is
I
you
did.
wanted to hang this in your
Yes,
home. Yes, yes,
I
yes.
wanted
I wrote
to
about
hang
this.
it in a place of honor in my home in San Diego. So, it stayed wrapped up downstairs for a few months. And then at some point, maybe around the holiday season, I decided, all right, it's time to hang up this picture. And as I started to do it, a family member said, whoa, wait a moment. Is that George Washington? I said, yes, that's George Washington. Did he own slaves? Well, yeah, but, and the family member just could not see any other dimension to George Washington but that he was a slave owner. And I asked her, well, do you recognize he's the greatest political leader in world history? He owned slaves. Well, do you recognize that he emancipated, for example, his slaves when he died? Doesn't matter to me.
He
Well,
had
do
him
you
in the first
recognize
place.
this? This is just one dimension out of 10 or 12 of a man. Didn't matter. So eventually, poor George Washington was never hung up in our family
So I
home.
wasn't.
And
So
that's,
I wrote about this in my piece because I
you
was so
did,
fascinated by it. And
you
and
did,
of
you
course
did.
you're not mentioning it now, but you were more specific about who the family member was in the book.
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
fact that
Trying
you're
to,
refraining, I
yeah,
will refrain as well.
yeah, yeah.
um. So I didn't know that the end result was you ended up not hanging it at all.
Well, for a few years, that is true. Family member went off to greater places elsewhere in the land. And then this past summer, I told my wife, it's time. Put this thing up. I love it. Why am I being held hostage by the dogma of other people? So what I did was I decided it's such a grand portrait. It probably is too grand for our San Diego home. So I did a little bait and switch. I told the family member, I got a new office. Why don't you come help me put things up in my office? She was like, oh, okay. Oh, all right. She was like, okay with
Well,
that.
that's still, you said, haven't given it
She
away.
went to my office, and you should have seen her mouth drop when she saw it was George Washington. She literally helped me hang up in a place of honor George Washington on my office, where he remains to this day. And
Oh,
I very
wow.
much, yeah. So
I
he's
mean,
up
it's
in
such
my
a
office, which is
metaphor. It's such a metaphor for race relations
yeah, it
that
is.
you didn't put it up for so long.
That's true.
Right? That the fear of this conflict or the implacability of
That's true.
what he supposedly stands for,
Sure.
it created a paralysis.
What do you make of that? Because I think with normal Americans, and I hate to use that word, but with many Americans, it just wouldn't be a big deal, right? It's George Washington. It's the father of the country, the president of the Constitutional Convention, the
and
winner of the American
and
Revolution.
an ancestor.
Well, hello,
I mean,
hello.
that's what was so intriguing about it. It's like you have this lineage that's just interesting, and
Yeah,
imagine having that in your home, and then
right,
when someone comes, not only is and by the way, I'm connected. No,
right.
what I make of it is, why you wrote your book, why I do the work I do,
Mhm.
that we have somehow gotten to a place where this reductionism,
Yes,
where
yes.
your worth or lack of worth
Yeah.
boil down to the singular characteristic of
hmm
race.
hmm hmm
It's like the single drop rule, you
Mhm.
know?
Right,
Mhm.
right, right.
In another way to look at it, that for this family member, she just couldn't walk away from evidently what she believed his history, regardless of whatever else he may have done.
Sure.
He had this singular characteristic. And what's so challenging about that, because I say this to, students and some of my colleagues, look, all of us believe if we lived at a different time, we would not do things that we condemn today, right?
That's true.
For example, owning slaves, right? One would
Yes.
think I would have never chosen to do that. But then I say, you know what? 100 years from now, people might look back at us and say, those people, they used to have water in plastic bottles. They were voluntarily degrading our environment, using all these materials. They were unscrupulous, they were immoral, So that's not the same as owning slaves. I'm not creating an
Right,
example.
understood. Right, right,
You don't want the letters from all your. But
right.
my point is, we tend to fall into this trap where we use contemporary
Yeah,
mores to judge behavior in the past. And you just have to think about the entire context of a person's life. Like George Washington
exactly.
did some pretty amazing things for this
Yes,
country,
he did.
you
hmm
know, and
hmm
um, and the fact that he had slaves is a horrific thing. It is at any time. But then it is important to understand he did emancipate his slaves. Slavery
Right.
was the norm around the world. These
That's right.
things, they're not as exculpatory, they're just contextual. So we have a better understanding of humanity and
hmm
what humanity has the capacity to achieve and why social norms are important. But you don't completely erase every other
Yeah.
element of a person's
Right.
life because
Right.
of this singular behavior.
Right.
And I think that's
And
one of
and
the
I
things.
think that the impulse to erase every other dimension of a person's life, I think it actually makes us dumber because
Mm.
we're less willing to engage the great figures of our past because they might suffer from some one negative dimension out of 10 or 12 or 15. And I think that makes us poorer in terms of our culture, in terms of our creative thought, in terms of the inheritance of the richness of our past. So, yeah, I think, let me put it this way. I think that many Black Americans, for whatever reason, just simply do not like the idea of being of multiracial heritage or having white ancestors. And I think sometimes it doesn't even matter what the white ancestor did. I'm thinking of someone, Jen knows who I'm talking about, but I won't mention names. I'm thinking of someone, and this person is a descendant of a basically abolitionist in Charleston, South Carolina, who was an immigrant from Scotland. And the person lived in a slave society, but they did what they could to undermine the slave system through covert abolitionist activities. I would think that's something to kind of feel proud of. This person just, a wall went down because he was white at a certain point in our history. This person just denies it, doesn't accept that person as an ancestor. And I just think that's so sad because Black Americans are not just 100% African in their origin. We're many things, and we're richer to the degree we can accept our whole selves in our family tree. I mean, it's interesting, Ian, if you go on ancestry.com, I would say there's a 50-50 split. Maybe 50% of Black Americans fully embrace the richness of their family tree, regardless of race. And then 50% roughly just stop. They just stop cold when they come to the first slave ancestor for the most part. They'll just stop and not have any curiosity, not have a further desire to know more. And that's one of the things I find interesting is that kind of willful ignorance and denial of one's full past. What do you think about that, Ian?
Well, well, I was just about to say when it forces you to deal with nuance and
yes,
deal with maybe the narrative that you have fixed in your head of the evil people, whites who were slave owners, who were terrible. Actually, they're actually part of your lineage, and in fact may have played some important role in the liberation of your own family. Right? And and the whole idea of being judged by your worst act, right? Therefore everything else is irrelevant. Imagine if I just asked someone, is that how you want to be judged? Think about your own life. Is there, I'm sure that all of us have done things that we're not proud of, right? Is that how you think you should be judged? I just find that there's this sort of moral absolutism that no, these people were horrific and evil, and it's not to say that there wasn't horror and evil, but we have to look at history through a lens and not be so shackled by it. It impedes our ability to see our common humanity today.
Those are great words.
Yeah, Wink and I talk a lot about this idea of old Americans. And one of the things that when we started to write, Ian, he had me go on to Ancestry and connect to my relatives across the color line, of which, he has clearly as well. So one of the things that brings me to, one of the things in your article was talking about, colorblindness is good and great and, yay, but how do we actually implement it? Where can we go with it? And one of the things that for me, at least in the writing of this book, that I think it was so simple and so elegant and yet so nuanced, like you said, of finding out that you really are, despite, what looks here, you are really such a mixture of other people, Wink being, I just have to throw this in there. Wink is not only related to George Washington, he's also related to Robert E. Lee. So there's that.
As are several old Black Virginians. So Ian, not a special thing, not a big deal.
Right. But it's just interesting when you find this out, that you this history, and then for me finding my Black ancestors and Black relatives living today, I really think that that is something that can be done. I would love to see this in schools where you actually find out, oh, hey, I've got a cousin who is black, white, Mexican, whatever, and being
Ever.
able to connect in that very human way as one way to actually to do this, to implement this kind of
Right. And also not to
communication.
freak out. What wasn't there on Henry Louis Gates's show, there is a woman, a black woman who's often speaking
Angela
about
Davis.
was it wasn't and was it
Yes.
Robert E. Lee was in her
No, I think
lineage?
Angela Davis, she was a descendant of the Mayflower Puritans.
Oh, and the thing is, it shouldn't even be funny, but it was funny just given her complete focus
Right,
on race, right?
Mhm.
right.
She's
That's
kind of
right.
a lighter
That's right.
skinned black woman too, which is also interesting.
Yeah, right, right,
Um,
right.
no, but you just start to realize the irrelevance of it. I mean, you know, so growing up in Jamaica for a portion of my life and then going back every summer, one of the amazing phenomenon was to spend time with white Jamaicans.
Oh,
Have
I've
you?
written about that, Ian. I've written about that
Oh, you have.
on
Okay, so you spent
Substack.
time with. So when you spend time with white Jamaican, like, it's like true, true white Jamaican. You're just like, oh, wait, what? And you just realize how much culture, upbringing, like
Yeah.
that's far more determinative
Yes,
of who you are as a person than
yes,
this, right?
yes,
Oh, I didn't realize
yes,
you'd written about white Jamaicans because
yes, I
it's
have.
such a,
Check out my Substack.
yeah,
Oh,
That's
I just
Winkfield Substack.
what's that?
I'm just giving the name of my Substack. It's Winkfield's Substack.
Okay, there
So
you go. There you go.
yeah, there you go.
But I just wish more people would have this kind of experience. Or by the way, Chinese Jamaicans too.
Oh,
Mhm.
okay.
Oh my gosh. Oh, and by the way, some of the Chinese Jamaicans and Black Jamaicans that come together produce some of the most beautiful people in the world.
Hmm.
But no, but when you see people who just have grown up in a completely different context
Yeah.
that would indicate, their skin color is supposed to say one thing, but then words come out of their mouth or the behaviors that they have completely
Hmm.
different. You just
Hmm.
realize skin color matters, but far less than all the other factors that really drive,
Now,
who we
how do we bring that Jamaican wisdom, right, about race and culture onto the mainland? Because I really think if we were more of Jamaican culture when it comes to understanding race, we would be more wise about culture and race. How do we how do we import more of that wisdom, or is it just a matter of numbers?
I don't know, we need a white Jamaican reggaeton star. We come to the country and sell out crowds and have everyone be like, whoa, he's white or she's white. And it's just, I mean, it's so ridiculous that we get
It is.
I remember, do you remember an artist? I used to work at MTV many years ago, and there was an artist whose name was Modest Yahoo. You ever
Doesn't
hear
ring a
that?
bell.
Oh, you got to listen to Modest Yahoo.
Okay.
He's
Okay.
dated now, but there was a
Yeah.
time. So he was this Jewish rapper, incredible. He was a great writer. His beats were strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's a Jewish rapper, and
Right.
he
Right.
performed in it's just like it just rocked people's worlds. But young people loved it. They just loved the fact that he was breaking all of the boxes, the
Yes.
stereotypes you're
Yes.
supposed to believe, that everyone's telling you this is
Hmm.
what you have to believe. And
Hmm.
we need a
Hmm.
Modest Yahoo. We need an equivalent of that. Because sometimes, in order for people to break out of their stereotypical views, you need an outside agitator who comes without baggage. One of the
Mm.
big things about art or sports is that people can enjoy that across culture, across race, because
Right.
art,
Right.
music, these things speak to us, speak to our common humanity. You
Right.
can, yeah, so we need someone like that,
Hmm.
who
Hmm.
can break down these walls.
Right. Right. You know, the irony, Ian, is that when I was younger, I thought to myself, maybe that's a role I was destined for because I'm of Black American family and history, but I grew up in a middle American, southern small town suburb. Uh, and so, in a sense, I understood both competing cultural worlds. But as I grew older, my sense was that the power of the racial boxes are too strong. And so that people don't really appreciate hybrid cultural people like myself. They don't really appreciate people who see the individual before the group. And I really do. I've written about this, that I have to turn on my race consciousness switch to really write about race because my default position is not race, it's not color. My default position is I'm just me. I'm an individual and I want to take the world as it is. Um, it's usually a family member, to be honest, who forces me to switch on the race consciousness switch, even though I have Black spouse and Black children. Great example. We're vacationing in Napa Valley, wonderful place, scenic, beautiful, celebrating someone's graduation from school. So we're going to these wine tasting places. It's so peaceful. So, I mean, race is the last thing on my mind, Ian. Last thing on my mind. And then one of my family members, God bless, family member, suggests, well, let's go to this wine tasting place. Well, great, fine. Come to find out, okay, it's a minority-owned wine tasting place. All right. And then another family member says, oh, look, they've got Black books. And then the family member looks at me as if to say, well, he might not be interested. I was interested
wait, say
because you
that
didn't
last
think I
part?
would be interested.
Wait,
So
wait,
I
say
went
that.
to the books, and all the books were of a kind, Ian. They were of a kind. You know what I'm talking about. Kendi, Coates, D'Angelo. And I just thought, here's an example where my default position was 11 Napa Valley race free. But because of decisions of close family members, I'm now forced back into racial mode. Comment upon that. Comment upon that.
Well, I mean, I mean, I very much am like you in the sense of,
Right,
race doesn't dominate every single aspect of my
right,
life. But,
right.
but I run schools in the Bronx. I was
True,
just I
true.
was in the Bronx this morning at our
Yeah,
school.
right.
So it's not so it it's not that you're not cognizant of race. It's just that it's not as if the inherent assumption is that it's this
Right.
weight
Yes.
on me. No,
Yeah,
it's just
yeah,
suppressing all of my energy. It's taking away
yeah.
my ability to decide for myself what I want to do.
Mhm.
It's not this huge burden on me.
Right, right.
The
Malcolm
problem,
Gladwell talks about that. He says that when he came from Jamaica to the States, the thing he noticed was he could always spot a West Indian in the crowd. Why? Because they lacked that weight of race
so
compared to
so
Native Americans.
I write about this in my book. So my dad, who
Right.
grew up in Jamaica, he said when he was growing up in Jamaica, I was a man. I'm
Yes.
a man. I'm a
Right.
man.
Right.
It
Right.
wasn't until he got to the United States that he was told, no, 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 you're a black man.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's really powerful. And he always said it was like, and he always had this thing where someone was trying to put it on him,
Yes. Yes.
on you.
Yes.
No, 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 no,
Yes.
no. You're a black man. You're a black man.
Yes.
You got to remember
Yes.
that. You're a
Gotta
black man.
remember.
And like this idea that like, oh, okay, so whatever my possibilities were of being a man, no, 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 you're a black man.
Yeah.
And he
Right.
always
Right.
was, no, 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 no. You
Right. Right. Right.
you are who you are, and
Yeah.
and I think kids in this country in particular, black kids, actually kids of all races, learn what it means to be a black person. It has these
Mm.
inherent constraints on
Mm-hmm.
you. You're
Mm-hmm.
inherently oppressed. You're
Mm-hmm.
inherently marginalized. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, I run schools to just break that nonsense.
Yes.
You know,
Yes. Yes.
uh,
Good for you. Good for you.
And how do you
No,
do that? I mean, that's
what's
one of
that?
the questions that you kind of you brought up, both your book and agency, and then also in the article is, we can talk about these ideas of color blindness, great ideas, but how do you do, and you are doing it, you're doing it through Vertex Academies.
Mhm.
How, I mean, how would you suggest that other people in the world, kind of go about doing what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, where we can
Well,
get
so
to that
let's
point?
definitely talk it through. I mean, the part of the problem is that you do have the Kendys of the world, the Robin DiAngelos of the world, because what they are always able to point to, and this is where, um, where there's smoke, there's sometimes fire, because they can always point to disparities in outcomes,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Mhm.
If you know Nicole Hannah Jones, Pulitzer Prize winning, author of the New York Times, and she's living quite the life, right? Being a successful journalist and all the other things she does. But and so her quality of life far exceeds the average American, right?
Right.
But when it comes to race, she will always say, yeah, no, 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 I'm an exception because here are the numbers. The number of black men that are
Mhm.
incarcerated,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
percent of black kids that can read at grade level. It just goes on and on and on. And so there are real disparities. And
Mhm.
so for those people who continue to use those as like a bludgeon,
Mhm.
as
Mhm.
proof of
Yeah.
both historical and present day discrimination, they can't let race go. They can't
Mm.
because
Mm.
they need race and thus racial discrimination as their all-purpose explanation for any disparity, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that's why they fight so hard against, people like me who come along and say, no, no, there's definitely a racial wealth gap, but that racial wealth gap completely disappears when you look at factors like the strength of the family,
Yeah.
whether you're
Yeah.
married or whether you're college educated. They don't want to hear that because that would suggest that race is not as big as a factor as they want it to be.
Right.
And
Right.
this is one of the challenges of our time. We can never make the progress we want to make on issues of race or many other factors unless we're really willing to be honest.
Mhm.
What are the factors that are really driving whether or not someone can be successful in this country? And this is usually around the moment that you've got to say things like, no, 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 but I do believe racism exists. It's not that, it's not that, look, I'm a black person, you're a black person, Jen, you're white, but we all know that people are racist. Some black
Sure.
people are the most racist people I know. So so it's not that racism does not exist. The
Yeah.
question is it as debilitating? Is it as oppressive? Is it as relentlessly um, immobilizing as it is that the D'Angelos, the Kendys, all
Sure.
ilk are saying? And the fact of the matter is that the answer is no. The answer is no. There are far more tools within the quiver, particularly of young people, which is why I run schools, to
Mhm.
let young people know that they can lead self-determined lives of meaning
Mm.
and purpose. It is
Mhm.
within their grasp. It is within their
Yeah.
grasp, but they can't do it alone, right? Agency, what I
Right.
advocate for, is individually practiced, but socially empowered. And when I
Mhm.
talk about social empowerment, the things that allow a young person to really blossom and to understand the agency, the power that they have to lead a self-determined life comes from some pretty basic things like the strength of the family that you form, not necessarily the family that you're from. Religious faith, living by a moral code, education, having access to school choice, vouchers, public charter schools, and entrepreneurship, like a work ethic, your ability to solve
Mm.
problems. That's what those four factors, family, religion, education, entrepreneurship, which happens to summate to F.R.E.E., my
Right.
acronym,
Right.
how we build agency in the rising generation, those factors are far more determinative than things like race. And
Mhm.
so Jen, when you ask, how what I try to do is to bring data to a conversation about, well, here I totally understand there are disparities in education and in healthcare, in prison rates, all of those things, but let's dive in as to why. When you look at the percent of men that are in prison who aren't at, seventh grade reading level, you're like, well, maybe that has a lot more to do with why these outcomes, or the percentage of kids that are from, low income single parent households. Maybe that has to do, and so you have to bring data and you have to bring empathy,
Mm.
right? It's not that I don't care or these people are just numbers. It's like, I really care. I care so much, I actually want to get to the right answer.
Right, right.
I care so much that I want to actually look at the data and follow it where it leads. I mean, Roland Fryer, great economist at Harvard, he's done a lot of work in his career and he's been vilified for it because he just follows the data. When he was looking at police shootings and police violence
Yeah.
in Texas, he went in, with a mindset he was likely going to prove that Black men are disproportionately, over
Mhm.
policed.
Yeah.
He found out actually that was not the case. And then he was attacked for publishing that that's not what the data told him, because you're supposed to believe a certain thing. So, we've got to have courage to stand up to these ideas, to recognize our common humanity, um, and just not succumb to a narrative that others have bought into so much that you threaten their entire sort of being
Yeah. Mhm.
by arguing a different theory as to why we're not making the kind of progress we'd like to make.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I sometimes think that we had more courage and independence of thought among Black Americans in the 1960s and 70s. I mean, I can remember as a little kid, I had 14 uncles. You would hear 14 different opinions about anything under the sun. There was never any sense that you better be careful what you say because Uncle so and so might cancel you or not talk to you. It was just a freewheeling, and I think we've lost that, sadly enough.
Totally. I
I
mean,
think we've lost that.
we're in the midst of a presidential election. One candidate is Black and the other candidate's white. And for some people, regardless of any other characteristic, the candidate that's Black, if you're Black, you're supposed to vote for this person. And there was was it Luke? Was a rapper, from several years ago.
Yeah,
He is posting things on Twitter for any Black person that, suggests that they might have a different view of who they're going to vote for that's not the Black person. He is like going online and bashing these people who are thinking differently or thinking that they may
yeah,
not vote
sure.
for them.
Well,
He
see,
just
that's unacceptable. That's
and,
unacceptable. You
and
can't
he's like
have that in a free
trying to
society.
beat
Yeah,
you into submission. And
yeah,
but the thing is, it takes real courage to.
sure. Do you remember Claudine Gay? I'm sure you do.
Of course,
Claudine
of
Gay.
course.
So, yeah, Harvard Business School, Harvard Law School here. I became very annoyed with her presidency towards the end of last year, particularly after the testimony before Congress. And I can remember there was like this supercharged um, campaign among some of my friends. Are you going to sign this letter? Are you going to sign this petition in support of Claudine Gay? We've got to stand it. The assumption was that if you're Black from Harvard, of course you're going to be in the trenches for her. And I actually wrote a piece in December delineating the reasons why I thought she was just bad news and should resign. And it occurred to me that I probably displayed uncommon courage among people in the Black community, which was kind of sad because I wasn't thinking of myself as courageous. I have Ian, I just have what's the word? I have a genetic disposition for truth telling. I like people who kind of just tell it like it is, which is why I like Roland Fryer, right? Or Glenn Loury, or Thomas Chatterton Williams, or Adrian Piper, or Coleman Hughes, and the names go on and on and on.
But see,
And
what's
I
interesting,
think,
I was
huh?
just about to say, what's interesting, what you just said a phrase, these people just tell it like it is. So I know what you mean by that, But the Lukes of the world, or the Ibram
Right.
Kendi, there are people who say, well, see, no, they're just telling it like it is, because the way it is
The way
is
it is.
we are in an oppressive
Right,
society
right,
that
right, right,
that's, white patriarchy, white
right.
supremacy. That's the way it is. So even that, like, I'm with you. Like Thomas Sowell, for me,
Sure. Right.
he studied, he researched, he just
Yeah.
tells it like it is.
Right. Right.
But for
Right.
others,
Right.
the Antichrist.
But I think, and this is my theory, and just work with me here. My theory is that most people are not constituted and built like you and I. Most people really do take their cues from the tribe, their group, quote unquote. So they're much more willing to be followers, right? As opposed to independently thinking, does this make sense to me or not? And if it doesn't, I'm not going to applaud. I'm not going to sign the petition. In fact, I might even write a letter opposing that position. But I think we are a minority. And my fear, Ian, is that we will not have our ranks increase because it's easier for people just to go along to get along. What do you think about that?
No, it's definitely no, it's definitely easier to conform.
Right, right, right.
You know, life is stressful enough.
Yeah, right,
Who wants to be on the chopping block?
right, 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 right.
No. And the thing is, there's also this kind of grain of truth that maybe it's true, and I, and there are these disparities. Who am I, you
Who
know,
am I?
who am I to stand up? And so it's really hard. And so,
Yeah,
like me, I run schools with 100% low income Black and Hispanic
right,
kids.
right, right.
But I know the world is coming after them. Some parts of the world are coming after them to tell them how the system is so rigged against you,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Right.
how diabolical it is that
mm-hmm. Yeah,
education's working the way it's designed for you to fail. Like
yeah.
there are these, in my view, myths
Mm.
that are being hoisted upon our kids, that if they end up believing them, if they end up believing they're inherently marginalized, by that there's a white supremacist lurking on every corner, just waiting to jump on them to ensure their failure,
Yeah, yeah.
we've lost the battle.
I wrote this book with Jen, more or less, because one day I had a conversation with someone in the car. It was kind of animated. Uh, and the person said to me, it was April 21st, 2018. Remember that date, Epiphany. The person said, Blackness is oppression.
Oh,
Nothing else matters. And I thought to myself,
all right. I remember
it's the
that line too.
Twilight Zone. This is not someone strung out on drugs who's in prison or has real. This is someone who's a third or fourth generation of Black generational privilege, for whom the halls of New Haven and Cambridge are not a strange place. This is someone who can claim summer homes in their lineage. This is someone who can claim people we read about in history books in their lineage. This is someone who has three Black slave owners in the person's lineage, four generations, I might add. And yet this person is saying Blackness is oppression, nothing else matters. So when I heard that, Ian, genetic truth teller that I am, I decided I needed to share my own views and my own life story, because I think my origin story shows that you can be born in the capital of the Confederacy in 1961, endure all kinds of slurs and what have you, and nonetheless set your sights high and see the rewards of your effort. We need to remember that there's a dignity, there's a dignity to achievement. There's a joy in accomplishment that we deny Black kids when we tell them Blackness is oppression, nothing else matters. Sure, maybe if you're living in a poverty-stricken neighborhood in the South Side of Chicago or Philadelphia, that might resonate with your environment. But no, not if you're a third or fourth generation person who's coming from a situation where life has been kind of easy. Life has been, one works hard, but one knows that when one grew up, one was going to private school and the expectation was an Ivy League school, and the expectation was a place on Wall Street. And that's not oppression. Nothing else matters. That's not what's going on there. So I think there's a cognitive dissonance between these kids and what they're being told in school. What do you think?
Well, I think there's a coping mechanism going on here because, obviously there's the term white guilt, but
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
also something called black guilt,
Good
especially in
idea.
especially in middle and upper class black families where
Yeah,
they're hearing the narrative. They're hearing the narrative. This is an oppressive nation. If you're
yeah,
black, just it's George Floyd. You're going to be Rodney King. You're always going to be the
yeah.
next. And so you almost have to rationalize your success in that, well, I'm one of the lucky ones, or I was able to break through. And so,
Mm,
but if you buy into the narrative, it's your coping mechanism, right? And so someone will say, even someone who's middle class or went to Harvard and Yale, no, blackness is oppression. Like, the who is it? The Black Student Union at Stanford Law School last year, um, they started to refuse to help the law school in promoting Stanford Law School to prospective Black students, right? Like, real, because they were somehow so ashamed. But of course, they were signing on to 150,
right,
$200,000
right,
jobs.
right, right.
I mean, but we are in this oppressive institution, and so
Right.
there is kind of, I don't know if I put it in a sort of black guilt, kind of a coping mechanism where the most privileged black kids, at some of our top universities for sure, are complaining about how oppressed they are.
Yeah,
You-
yeah.
They're on a plantation.
Coleman Hughes talks about that.
It's
Yeah,
just,
at Columbia.
Right.
it's unbelievable. I mean, it's just, first of all, it's infuriating to think about how everything that people, poured into you to give
Sure.
you the opportunity to then, by the way, go out and create lots of opportunity for others, but not by stepping back and saying how oppressive
Hmm.
this.
Hmm.
Like, okay, then create a new pathway. I went to Harvard Business School, I went to Cornell and all these things, but
Yeah,
I don't believe anyone's marginalized. I believe people are lacking opportunity. And so I want to work hard to create access to opportunity for everybody,
yeah.
right?
Right,
And if you don't make it, it's not necessarily because of your skin color or any other singular characteristic. It
right.
might be that you didn't have access to opportunity, or it might be that you did have access to opportunity and you didn't work hard enough, or others worked harder than you.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I know someone, Ian, I know someone who was so bright, so smart, and from a low-income environment. And this person, I thought, this person just needs more opportunity. This person needs more access. And so in my empathy phase, Jen knows the story, I encouraged this person to consider the ABC program, which you may have heard of, A
Yeah,
Better
sure.
Chance.
Yeah,
You
just like prep for prep. Yeah.
yeah. This person could have, if they had applied, gone to, I don't know, St. Paul's or Phyllis Exeter, no
Yep.
charge because of the income level of their parent, single
Yep.
mother parent. And I thought, this is a wonderful opportunity. The person refused to apply. The person refused to lift a finger to fill out the application. And I had lined up like
Because
references for this person, alumni of the ABC program. They could have facilitated their access. Nada. So when those kind of things happen, Ian, I become crestfallen. I feel like,
why? What do you think? Why do you think this person denied that opportunity?
okay, three reasons. One, I think it was something new and they were not courageous to engage the larger world. Number
Mhm.
two, I think this person feared losing a part of their cultural self.
Right.
All they knew was the street in Virginia, low income. How are they going to make sense of their life if they find themselves in this august St. Paul's or Phillips Exeter, hundreds
Yep.
of miles away from home, probably having less money than anyone else that they see walking around campus? And then number three, maybe they just don't trust this person who's telling them that he knows that maybe they are anti-Black savior. and they saw me as a black savior.
Oh,
Hmm.
well,
What
that's
do you
interesting.
think, Ian? What do you think?
Well, there probably is something to the anti-black safety because, I've actually dealt with people who support
Right,
organizations like ABC and Prep for Prep, and
right,
they feel
right,
patting themselves on the back
right,
because they
right,
were
right, right, right,
able to pluck out some black kids.
right.
And look, those organizations do great work and they provide
Yeah,
access to great schools. I mean, I choose to run schools
right.
in the heart of the Bronx because our kids need more access far earlier than
Hmm,
when
hmm.
Prep for Prep
Yeah.
and these organizations are picking them up. No, no, no. I want to put our students in a position that they know that they belong, that
Mm,
they have just as much access to the greatest organizations, opportunities in life, and that they should
hmm.
never assume that because of this,
Right.
they don't have access. I mean, maybe we'll end by I should share you asked me about my origin story.
Yes.
After telling you about my parents, um, I did have an experience when I was 12 years old that I am no doubt changed my life and how I perceive, particularly around issues of race. My parents had moved to the United States. Again in '68, we initially had moved to Brooklyn, and then we ultimately moved to a small town in Queens, New York. We moved to
Hmm,
Laurel, Queens, and Laurelton, predominantly Jewish, Italian community, predominantly white, but was slowly becoming more racially integrated as more Black people were coming in. And that created lots of drama. There was lots of racial tension. And my junior high school, 231, was kind of the epicenter of a lot of these racial incidents. And the local school board decided that the way to solve this problem was to create an annex, to create
hmm,
another junior high school in Rosedale, a town 2 towns over that was more permanently and predominantly white. And
hmm,
so all the parents in junior high school 231, so when I was 12 years old, decided to all the white parents took their kids out of
hmm,
230 and sent them to this other junior high school, this annex in Rosedale. And so my parents, who had come to the United States in search of the American dream, under the assumption that where the white kids go, that's where the better education will be,
hmm,
they were going to take me out of 231 and send me to this other school. And so on the Sunday night before we were supposed to file the transfer papers, I'll always remember that night. My dad was on his recliner, my mom was on the uh, sofa. We're having this conversation where we had many family conversations, and I begged my parents to stay. My parents would crawl through broken glass for for me and my brother, and they were always right. I would never challenge them, but on this it didn't feel right. Like, why, just because everyone that was going to be left in my school, junior high school 231,
hmm,
was Black, that it was inherently bad, that it just automatically, and that if most of the white kids are over there, it's going to be inherently better, automatically
hmm.
better.
Sure, sure.
And I begged and I pleaded my parents to stay, and they relented. It's the first time my parents really listened to me. And frankly, it was the first time I really asked for anything of importance. But, but I felt, and that's when I really experienced what I now call my moment of agency, my
Hmm,
coming agency moment where I felt I could play a role in my own future. But there's no doubt that when I run schools today or look at any institution, the demographic makeup of the people within a given institution should have nothing to do with the highest of expectations that you set for people in that institution, regardless of race, right? And that's what I just think we need to find ways to keep coming back to this idea that your race is a factor, but is certainly not the factor anymore in either creating advantage or creating disadvantage, right? And that's that it'll be my epitaph. But I just want our students to know that they are complex, beautiful individuals, diverse human beings, and diverse in every dimension of the word. And we need to celebrate that and own it. Um, and yet realize that we're all tied together through this idea of our common humanity.
Right, our common humanity. I like that, our common humanity. I was reading 30 seconds. I was reading a book over the past few days. I didn't know that around 48,000 years ago, our ancestors, Homo sapiens, were almost decimated by Neanderthals. There were battles and battles. And so about 48,000 years ago, there were only 50 humans left, shivering in cold in caves in the middle Mediterranean Sea. And every human on this planet is a descendant of those 50 humans who survived assaults from the Neanderthals. So when I read that, I thought, I feel closer to every person on the planet because we're all descendants from those same lonely, scared, frightened 50 people. And if you think about it, we really are all cousins. You just have to go back far enough.
Exactly.
All cousins.
Exactly.
Yes.
Wow.
This has been great, Ian.
Thank
Yes,
you.
outstanding. Yes, great conversation. We could go on for much longer.
We could.
We've got to go out and actually do the work now.
There you go. Exactly.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Thank you so much, Ian.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Onward.
you.
Okay.
Onward and upward. That's right.
Onward and upward.